Hello my friends and welcome back to Garhdo Goes Geek, and on today's episode, as a way of closing out Season 4, I'm going to take a look at some of the best things of 2022, in my opinion, that I have thoughts about but haven't yet been able to cover, as well as maybe a little bit of a follow-up to some of the stories and other discussions that we've had throughout the year. It's been an interesting year, 2022. There's been a lot of great content, and while I've been catching up on some of it, some I've watched as I've gone on, and yeah, I have thoughts on a fair bit of it. This isn't everything from 2022, but it's the best of what I've seen, so hope you'll join me. Now, I do want to stress that as we seem to be living in almost like a silver age of television, or at the very least the golden age of streaming, there has been a lot of great geek content that is released in 2022. I'm not going to talk about everything, simply because I am not caught up on everything. There are shows like House of the Dragon, Rings of Power, Star Trek Prodigy, Star Trek Strange New Worlds, that I am aware are out there and are beloved by their audience, but I have not gotten around to watching as much as I want to, and I really do want to with a lot of this stuff. Instead, I'm simply going to talk about the ones that I have seen that struck a chord with me and gave me something that I wanted to discuss, but maybe not something that was going to fill a whole episode. And so, you know, I plan on catching up on everything else in the coming year. You know, I plan on catching up on... I plan on getting Paramount Plus so I can catch up on Star Trek, for example. I plan on, you know, sitting down and watching House of the Dragon. Not that I've even finished Game of Thrones, really. You know, I got very annoyed with Game of Thrones as it started to deviate from the books, and I heard everything about Season 8, and I don't think I actually went and finished it. Rings of Power, I've heard very mixed things about. I want to be able to sit down and watch it completely. I remember I was very excited for it, and what I've seen looks incredible, but I've also heard very, very mixed things, and I don't know enough about you know, the Silmarillion, the Unfinished Tales, things like that. Although apparently Rings of Power isn't adapting those because it doesn't have the rights to them. Instead, it's creating an original story set in the Second Age, which makes it even more interesting, but also something to be more nervous about, as far as I'm concerned. And so, yeah, I've already talked about a lot of great content this year. You know, I've talked about and some very bad content as well. You know, I've discussed things like the MCU, I've discussed Morbius, I've discussed Final Space. Not that that was something that, you know, was new this year, but it was something that the news of its cancellation came this year. You know, I've discussed the Batman. You know, so there have been things that I have discussed this year already, and so I'm probably not going to cover those again in this episode. Instead, there's a few other things that I want to discuss, so I'm going to do those. Okay, so if I don't mention your favourite thing, it's simply because I haven't seen it yet. Just a quick one before I get into some of the more sci-fi and fantasy picks that I do want to talk about, just because it was so much of a sensation this year, and I think it contrasts nicely with a related film that also released this year, which is Glass Onion. Now, I really enjoyed the first Knives Out. The first Knives Out. The film Knives Out, the first Benoit Blanc story. I know a lot of people were quite jarred seeing Daniel Craig do a southern drawl. Personally, I thought I thought the rest of the film was fine, so it didn't bother me at all. You know, he's an actor; he can do an accent. It's fine. You know, what interested me was the mystery and the characters in that mystery, especially because the way that the story worked in Knives Out is we kind of knew what was going on. You know, it wasn't as much of a secret. There were twists and turns to it, but we as an audience knew what had happened going in. So for the story of Knives Out, there was less of a mystery aspect. Glass Onion has a mystery, focused around Miles Bron and focused around the characters involved. And I really enjoyed it because the mystery itself was quite a good one. And, you know, the characters, again, are all played by great actors. Absolutely great actors. You know, Edward Norton, Catherine Hahn, Janelle Monáe, Kate Hudson, Dave Bautista. All of them absolutely brilliant. I've forgotten the other one. Leslie Odom Jr. He was really good in this. You know, just like the first film with Chris Evans, Michael Shannon, Jamie Lee Curtis, you know, all great actors. But there was much more of a mystery going on here. And the non-linear storytelling, which was used to unravel that mystery, made it very rewarding. And it's shaking up what can be done with the mystery genre. And the reason why I think that this works quite well is because, I'm a fan of mysteries. I'm not a huge fan of them, but I do enjoy them. And my wife Tallulah watches a lot of mystery and crime and whodunits. Like, she's a big fan of Agatha Christie. So as a result, we've also seen the recent Kenneth Branagh Poirot films. And of course, Death on the Nile also released this year. And Death of the Nile, I enjoyed far more than I thought I would. Although not as much as the first film, Murder on the Orient Express. And I'm not sure why that is. I found it hard to kind of narrow in as to why that is. But there is some elements of similar approaches, like the way they're trying to... Like, there are elements of non-linear storytelling in Death of the Nile, from what I remember anyway. Has been a while since I've watched it. Like, I've not had the urge to go back to it. Glass Onion, I've gone back to, and I watched again. Death on the Nile, I haven't. And when Murder of the Orient Express came out, and then when we learned they were doing Death on the Nile, I was quite excited, and I was like, okay, yeah, like Kenneth Branagh do as many of these as he wants to do. You know, let him do all the Poirot mysteries. Hell, why not? Get a star-studded cast for each of them. But when you see Death of the Nile and put it up against Glass Onion, it shows that while Death on the Nile, I mean, on one hand, it's adapting a work which is, I think at this point, nearly 100 years old. by Agatha Christie. You know, one of the influential novels in the genre. And even though from what I've been told, they have changed elements of the story for Death on the Nile. It's not quite the same story. It's not quite the same characters, and I don't think it's quite the same solution to the murder, to the mystery. But Glass Onion shows instead that you can do something else with a mystery. You can do something else with a whodunit. And have it become very unique and interesting. Because, yeah, Glass Onion was really good. And while I was excited to see more of the Kenneth Branagh Poirot films, at this point, I'm far more interested in seeing Rian Johnson, Benoit Blanc mysteries. Because, you know, while I'm sure the problem with the mystery genre and the tropes in it is it can eventually become tired and rote and predictable. But Glass Onion kept me guessing. You know, even this, with the similarities that it has to the first film, Knives Out, it still kept me guessing. And I very much enjoyed it. And I am excited to see what happens next with those characters. Well, with that character, with Benoit Blanc. And, you know, what Rian Johnson might cook up next. And I actually think Glass Onion might even be better than Knives Out. Whereas Death on the Nile is not better than Murder on the Orient Express. Not really by any means. So yeah, I'm not sure how often I will talk about mysteries and whodunit. I might do an episode on them in the future. I know true crime is a massive thing, crime and mysteries and stuff like that. And, you know, if more of these Benoit Blanc movies come out, I will talk about them. But yeah, it's just the contrast between the two, between Glass Onion and Death on the Nile. How one is so memorable that I haven't stopped thinking about it. Even though, as Benoit Blanc says in the film, it's dumb. Even though it's dumb, I can't stop thinking about it. Meanwhile, in some aspects, Death on the Nile is a bit too clever for its own good, and also becomes forgettable. Interesting how that works. So the first thing I want to discuss is one that originally I didn't think I would discuss. It was just a film I sat and watched with my kids and didn't think much of it. But it stuck with me, and I found that I had thoughts about it that I wanted to get out there. And that film is Lightyear. Now, Lightyear is the film about Buzz Lightyear. It's been created by Disney and Pixar. It's CG. It's very good. You know, I had a lot of fun watching it, and I think it's, you know, it's perfectly fine for what it is. You know, Disney and Pixar are very, very good at what they do. Pixar especially are very good at tapping into a strong emotional core for their stories, and I think that's the case with Lightyear. It is set... Essentially, the film posits itself as the film that Andy would have watched in the original Toy Story. The film that would have made him interested in the character of Buzz Lightyear. And that, to me, was one of the things that ended up sticking with me the most, I suppose. Because that makes no sense. Like, Toy Story came out in 1995. Now, there's nothing in the film that suggests that it is set in 1995, but it seems logical, based on the technology that we see in the film. It makes perfect sense that it takes place in 1995. And this is not a film that could have come out in 1995. Like, computer graphics were not at this level in 1995. Toy Story was the first full-length CGI picture. Now, you could argue, okay, perhaps in the universe of Toy Story, Lightyear is traditionally animated. I'm like, okay, that might make sense. That would be possible. Traditionally animated rather than done with CGI. That would be possible. You could also argue that perhaps it was a live-action film. Absolutely impossible. There is no way what is presented in this world could be done in any form other than animation without it costing a ridiculous amount, which is not something that you would have seen in 1995. Kids' movies in 1995 didn't look anything, kids' sci-fi movies especially, did not look anything like Lightyear does. I will say with Lightyear itself, the movie is quite good. It's Buzz Lightyear is initially part of a Star Command team that end up stranded on a planet. And, Buzz becomes a test pilot to try and, work a test flight to help them escape the planet. The thing is, and this is one of the things that I found the most interesting, and again, the thing that really stuck with me, as he approaches light speed, or hyperspace, I think they call it in this, he is affected by time dilation. And so 4 minutes on the ship for him becomes 4 years on the planet, and so on. And so as he keeps testing these new fuel sources, these new crystals, to try and help everyone get home, he ends up becoming separated from everyone he came with, because their lives carry on and advance without him. Like his colleague Alicia Hawthorne, she gets married to a woman, she has a child, her life progresses, and eventually she dies of old age while Buzz is in space. And that's quite a tragic part of the story. And this is something that I believe is in the theory of relativity. Like, it is a scientific principle, but it's not something I see a lot of science fiction use, which is the idea that as you approach closer to light speed, time dilates. Time becomes... like, time for you slows down relative to the rest of the universe. And the only other thing I can really think of that used it was Ender's Game. Reading the novel for Ender's Game, the time dilation in that was a key part of the story. And it's how the human colonies spread. So it was quite interesting seeing it in this, and then having it be such a key part of the film and explaining why Buzz is so lonely. And I think it really did a lot to humanize the character, because I think if the film had presented the same kind of gung-ho persona that the toy in the original Toy Story presents as Buzz Lightyear, that would have been really boring. That would not have made for a fun film. This film, though, the Man Out of Time, has a lot of heart to it, and he meets, you know, when he finally tests this original, you know, this new device, and he ends up in the future, and now in the future, you know, after he's tested this new fuel source, the planet's been attacked by Zurg, and you know, Zurg is, you know, he has this army of robots that are attacking the planet, and he ends up teaming up with a group of cadets, including the grown-up Izzy, the daughter of Alicia, and sort of forming them into a squad of soldiers, a squad of heroes to help him fight Zurg and survive. And Zurg himself turns out to be a future Buzz from an alternate timeline who essentially became nihilistic after losing the colony, and then travelled back in time to try and save it. And it's clever. It's got a bit of a timey-wimey thing going on, to quote Doctor Who. You know, there's time travel is one of those that I think can work really well, and when it's done badly, I can kind of feel it. Like, I remember being mesmerised by the time travel logic in the original Lost in Space when I was a kid. Not the original Lost in Space, sorry, the film Lost in Space. Because there becomes a point where the time travel logic in that film makes no sense. But in this, it does, and it works. And yeah, the film was good. The voice performances were generally really good, especially Chris Evans and Keke Palmer as the two main characters. They were both, excuse me, they were both really good. The supporting cast was good. James Brolin as Zurg was definitely threatening enough. The Zurg design was great as well, like really, really good. And there's a post-credits sequence for Zurg, so they could easily do a sequel for this if they wanted to. And I'll be honest, I kind of hope they do. I think it would work. So yeah, I enjoyed it. And like I said, it stuck with me. There were things in Lightyear that stuck with me to the point that I saw it, you know, back when it dropped on Disney Plus, and you know, I'm still thinking about it all this time later. And obviously that happens with some of the Pixar movies anyway, but this is the first time that anything Toy Story has really sort of struck with me in the same way. So yeah, it was good. And I think for a kid's, you know, an introduction and a family film to a lot of these big science fiction concepts, I think it worked really well. One film that I remember really enjoying in recent years, despite being quite nervous about it, as I think a lot of fans were, was Sonic the Hedgehog. The Sonic the Hedgehog movie that came out a couple of years ago, I really enjoyed. Probably a lot more than I thought I would. I was very nervous that it was just focusing on Sonic. And it seemed to be introducing all these human characters. Although I do understand why it was doing that. Any film with a CGI protagonist, unless the entire film is going to be CGI, it becomes expensive to do. You know, because you're putting them in a photorealistic world. And especially something like Sonic, where the initial design that they made got such a negative pushback that they had to completely redo it, which I do think was the right call. I think that original ugly Sonic design was awful. And I hope whoever approved that design, apparently over the protests of so many people involved, got fired. Because it was terrible. And the film would not have worked with that original design because so much of the film was predicated on finding Sonic himself charming and adorable and enjoying his relationship with the human character. Is it Tom, the Donut Lord? I've been so used to calling him Donut Lord, I've completely forgotten what his actual name is. But yeah, so the actual film was pretty good. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a good way of exploring some of Sonic's lore, and, you know, a great introduction to the character. So obviously this year Sonic 2 came out, and I, again, was really looking forward to it, especially because, you know, it was building on that first film, and it was also introducing my favourite character, which is Knuckles. I freaking love Knuckles, obviously, you know, in case my big Ken Penders Sonic episode that I did, you know, and the fact that Knuckles is the only Sonic character in my banner, you know, sort of didn't make that clear. You know, Knuckles is my favourite Sonic character, and it's because of, you know, how he was used in the comics that I used to read, specifically the Sonic the comic that was out here in the UK rather than the Sonic the Hedgehog from America, but still. And, you know, he's introduced in the movie, and he's played by Idris Elba, which, again, great casting. And also he's being used in his traditional Sonic 3 identity of being a villain, of helping Eggman, or Robotnik, because they do use the Robotnik name in this. And yeah, that's fantastic. And I thought they did a really, really good job with it. I really do. I think it was a lot of fun. I really like how they used Robotnik, how they brought him back, how they introduced the Chaos Emeralds and started introducing more of these elements from the games. The way they've adapted the lore of the Chaos Emeralds in this is fantastic. And if anything, kind of streamlines some of the quite clumsy lore that the games have had over the years. You know, once Sonic moved into 3D, the stories got very, very elaborate, and there's a lot of confusing backstories. You know, even the side games have gotten ridiculous, and this is from someone who loves all that sort of stuff. So, you know, it has gotten very, very bizarre. This is one reason why the comics under Ian Flynn were so good, because he was able to quite deftly tie a lot of these plot threads together in a way that worked. That's why I'm quite glad that he's writing the games now. Like, he's writing Sonic Frontiers, which is also came out this year. And I will say as well that this year has also been a kind of a year of Sonic, because you've had Sonic Frontiers, Sonic 2, and also Sonic Prime. Sonic Prime hit Netflix. That was also very good. It was only part one of the series. It was not the whole series at once. But it was very good. It was a lot of fun. It's the first 8 episodes. Again, there's a lot of, you know, non-linear elements to the storytelling. You know, it sort of drops us in the middle of this battle between Sonic and his friends and Eggman. And then something happens which then sends Sonic jumping to different dimensions. And there's a few that he visits over the course of this series. The first one he's in for a few episodes, then he hits another one, then he's in that for a couple of episodes, then another one, and so on. And I think it works really well, but then they do sort of flash back to before that battle, when they introduce other characters and introduce the whole idea of what Eggman was up to. And I think it works really well. I really enjoyed it. The voice cast is very good. It's different to the main voice cast, and the actor they've got for some of the Knuckles variants is very good. Because it's actually a different voice playing Knuckles to his variants, which is weird. I'm not sure why. And I also like that Rouge is quite prominent in it, as well as Shadow. Shadow's kind of in the background throughout much of this season, this part, and I think he's going to be more prominent as the second part drops next year. I'm glad that the second part has been confirmed and it's already coming, because otherwise it ends on a cliffhanger, and I would be very annoyed at that. And, you know, knowing what Netflix is like for cancelling stuff. Shadow also appears in Sonic 2. The post-credit sequence for Sonic 2 confirms that basically Shadow is going to appear in Sonic 3, which is also interesting because they've kind of done the, you know, animal character becomes villainous and then joins the heroes, which is, you know, it was Knuckles' thing before it was Shadow's, but they can't really retread that same plot. The one criticism I would have is that while it's great we're getting Shadow, like Shadow is the second most popular character in the entire Sonic franchise, you can't leave him out of the films for too long. But there are some characters I would rather see first. You know, I would rather see, you know, we've had Tails and Knuckles be introduced in this film. We've got some great scenes of Sonic and Tails together throughout this film. You know, for a lot of the film, they're kind of paired off together, rather than Sonic being paired with a human character, which was great. And that's the sort of thing you can do when it's a sequel and you have a bigger budget. You know, the Ninja Turtles movie that came out a few years ago, Out of the Shadows, did the same thing. Out of the Shadows featured a lot more of the Turtles just being the Turtles, whereas the first movie was very much them with April and kind of separating them off, and, you know, it was worse as a result. You know, like I said, it's true of every movie with CGI characters. There's always human characters. Although I will say, for the Sonic movies, you actually care about the human characters. Like, these are human characters that don't just feel like they've been included. Like, they actually have plots and stories. And yes, it's not as interesting as the main characters, as Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, but it's still interesting enough. Like, I care about them, and I kind of want to see, you know, I don't miss the heroes as much when the human characters are on screen, because the human characters are still enough to keep me invested. You know, Agent Stone, for example, is brilliant, and I really want him to come into the games. He's fantastic, you know, as Eggman's sidekick. So yeah, but yes, what I was saying is I'd rather see characters like Amy or Metal Sonic reappear in this film universe before perhaps getting to Shadow, or at least as well. Because, you know, Amy is quite a prominent character in a lot of Sonic media, and the fact she's missing in this is quite noticeable. I will say, just another thing, Sonic is one that's got a bit of a reputation for having a lot of ancillary characters. You know, Sonic is quite well known for most games introducing new characters. You know, people make their own Sonic characters because there are that many of them. You know, you don't see people making their own Mario characters as much, for example. And this is because Mario is generally quite trim in terms of its characters. However, the Mario Brothers movie that is upcoming, the trailer and the cast list seem to suggest that it's going to throw pretty much every major character in. On one hand, that's kind of expected. It's an Illumination movie. It's animated. You know, Illumination have a trend for kind of throwing everything in. That's what they do. But I do find it ironic that Mario, the series known for focusing on Mario, you know, and not really adding too many other characters, is the movie that seems a bit clustered, while Sonic, the series known for having so many characters that it becomes ridiculous, has actually shown more restraint as a film when it comes to introducing those characters. Like I said, Shadow's the second most popular character in the whole franchise. He's not in the first movie. He's not in the second movie, beyond a mid-credits cameo. You know, he's not going to appear in full until the third movie. Even Tails. Tails doesn't appear in the first movie, except for a cameo right at the end. So I think it's interesting. I think they're building something good, and I'm really here for this kind of Sonic revival. You know, the comics are good again. The IDW comics are pulling out some absolutely amazing stuff. From what I've heard of Sonic Frontiers, the games are good again, despite flaws. And then obviously we've got Sonic Prime on TV. We've got the Sonic movies. I'm excited. I'm curious to see where it goes next. Now, I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't talk about what has come out in the MCU since I did my episode earlier this year. I believe when I was doing that episode, She-Hulk hadn't yet finished. And She-Hulk I definitely enjoyed a lot more as it approached its ending. Not just because they finally brought Daredevil in, but also because the plot thread they were starting to go for with Intelligentsia really felt like the sort of story that needed to be told. But then the finale did something very, very different and kind of unexpected, which I really enjoyed, which was the huge fourth wall break. Where, I mean, the fourth wall breaks had been a bit hit and miss throughout the show. There's not a lot of times where I feel they really made use of the TV format. The one at the camp, not the camp, the retreat, where they reintroduced the Wrecker. She did I bet they skipped him from the recap and then did that. That was a clever one. But like some of the other asides, like in the earlier episodes, like when she pointed out that the A and B plot were intersecting, they weren't the best. They were, they could have been done a lot better. Like some of the early John Byrne She-Hulk fourth wall breaks are sublime. Like, her tearing through the ads page to get to the next part of the story, for example, or criticizing the lazy writing of the writer as it's happening. And so the finale for me felt like that encapsulated, like her leaving the comic, her going to the Disney Plus Marvel homepage. That was fantastic. I really enjoyed that. Really did make me chuckle. I think the only downside was that had been spoiled for me ahead of time. Like, watching the episode, if that had just happened, I'd have been like, wait, what have I done? And then she would have appeared, and that would have been brilliant. Her entering the main universe and meeting Kevin and criticizing the ending that he's written because it's formulaic. Everything has to end in this big smackdown fight. Very funny. I really enjoyed it. And the opening of the final episode, where they essentially redid the title sequence of the old Incredible Hulk TV show, including having a body double who was playing She-Hulk. Absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. It was one of my favourite jokes in the whole thing. It was a shame that came so late, considering it was in the original trailer. But, oh my god, it was brilliant. Loved it. Werewolf by Night, that came out on Halloween, that was a lot of fun as well. Something very, very different. The black and white was a great touch. I thought Man-Thing was absolutely fantastic. He looked incredible. And the actual transformation to the werewolf from Jack was very good as well. I like that it was all practical effects for the actual werewolf. And I think a lot of Man-Thing was practical effects. There was definitely some CGI in there. But I remember reading online that there's a lot of practical effects in the design as well, which is great. The whole thing had a very old school horror vibe, and it worked for me. And I think they were able to do a lot more by the fact that it was black and white. They were able to do a lot more blood and gore without going over the top. But, you know, I think a colour version of that would be rated a lot higher. But yeah, it was interesting. I'm curious to see the characters again. I really like Elsa Bloodstone in the comics, so if they use her half as well as they have in that, I'd be very interested. And yeah, I'm here for seeing more monsters in the MCU. The Marvel monsters are a great aspect of the comic lore that I think always needs a bit more exploration. You know, I'm always down to see them explored from the giant monsters like Fin Fang Foom all the way down to little things like Zombie and Werewolf by Night. So yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it. And I like the format of the special presentation as well. I think that worked really well. And I also think Michael Giacchino, who is obviously a musician, did a very good job with the direction. Like, this is a very finely edited, very well directed piece of film. You know, wearing its inspirations on its sleeve. And I think that's because timing in movies is like timing in music. You want things to flow and progress and to build properly, and I think he does that here. I think it works very, very well. There was one other special presentation, which was Guardians of the Galaxy, the holiday special. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Very silly. I like the focus on Drax and Mantis. I like the reveal that Mantis is Peter's sister. I thought that was lovely, and the way he reacted to that news was absolutely beautiful. The song at the start was hilarious, and that is going to be on my Christmas playlist because it's funny. Yeah, it was just a lot of heart and a lot of soul, and, you know, a Marvel project that doesn't have a villain, that doesn't end in a big fight, that isn't a big CGI spectacle, that is just something sweet and silly. And I think we need more things like this. You know, these two special presentations, both Werewolf by Night and the Guardians Holiday Special, they're really good. Like, they are really good. You know, the rumours coming from Marvel are that these have gone over really well. And there's been sort of unsubstantiated rumours that apparently Marvel has been a bit unhappy with Phase 4 as a whole. You know, the amount of content that has been produced and the quality of some of it. And while there has been a lot of content in Phase 4, this is true, I don't think there's much more than what was previously happening. If you consider that during the Infinity Saga, we had the Netflix shows, we had Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., we had Runaways, we had Cloak and Dagger. Like 2018, for example, I think saw something like 6 or 7 different Marvel shows get a season, as well as like 4 movies, three or 4 movies. And so, you know, it's not like there's really any more content in Phase 4 than there used to be. It's just that it's all consolidated into Marvel. So people seem to weigh it as more important than they did some of the older stuff. But the older stuff was all tied in. It was all the same. It was all the same universe. You know, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is just as canon as something like Loki is. You know, it's just that it's different characters.
but you can get by without watching everything. If you do watch everything, you learn more, but you can get by without it. But I think more special presentations would be a good thing. I think it's a good way of telling a very self-contained story, because perhaps not everything needs a full series. There's some characters like, for example, the Silver Surfer, who I would love to see introduced. Perhaps introduced in a special presentation before we see him in a film. That could be great. Give us the origin of that character before we see him. They are developing new series, though. Obviously, there's all the upcoming ones. There's rumours now about a Wonder Man series as well. And they're getting the actor who played Black Manta and Dr. Manhattan in Watchmen to play him. I've forgotten the gentleman's name at this point. But, great actor. So he could be a lot of fun in the role. But I think the final MCU thing that I need to talk about is Wakanda Forever. And I think Wakanda Forever is absolutely fantastic. Wakanda Forever, the best way I can think to describe it is that it is a film about grief being made by a collection of people who are experiencing and exercising their grief. Because the people involved in this film, from director and screenwriter Ryan Coogler, Letitia Wright, Angela Bassett, Denai Guerrera, Winston Duke, they all worked with Chadwick Boseman quite closely in a lot of cases. And so this film honouring that character, and while also progressing that story and taking it in new directions and exploring these characters, I think works so well. And, as much as I love T'Challa, and I really, really do, I don't think this film... I can't imagine making Black Panther 2 with him, because having seen Wakanda Forever and seeing what it does with his absence, there's a lot of very strong characters in Wakanda that we get introduced to in that first movie. Queen Ramonda, Shuri, Okoye, Nakia, M'Baku. They are great characters, and in the first film they only serve as anchor points for T'Challa's story. They influence T'Challa's story and his decisions and his motivations throughout the movie. But in this, they become the central characters. And while it is still Black Panther, this movie is an ensemble movie. It is a movie about Wakanda and the characters in Wakanda. It is not just a movie about the Black Panther. And I think it works really, really well. I think there's a lot of... The introductions of the new characters are great as well. Namor is fantastic. Tenoch Huerta in... I believe it was his first English-speaking role as well. He does a really good job. Dominique Thorne playing Riri Williams. I think she gets a much better introduction than her comic book counterpart got. Her version in the comics was introduced in a way that made her quite insufferable. But this version of the character, her introduction is a lot stronger, and I would be interested in seeing more of her, which is good because the Ironheart series is coming up. And, you know, it was one I was dubious about until seeing this. And seeing her in this, I'm like, yeah, she's really good. Like, I can see that character anchoring a show. You know, the actress is good, the character cuts a very good first impression. And, you know, there's changes to the characters in Wakanda that last and have an impact. And I'm excited for that. And yeah, I'm very... This is a very, very talented cast. And I do think there's been a lot of discussion about whether or not they should have recast T'Challa. And I do think it's one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't moments. Because Chadwick Boseman's death was untimely, and it was tragic, and it was something that shook the fan base, because we were expecting to see more of his character, to see more of him. You know, this was a character... You know, that first film was a sensation. It made the money it did because for a lot of people, this was the first real black superhero they'd seen. But not just like African-American superhero, like a black African, Afrocentralist superhero. That's incredible. Like, I understand I'm a white guy, but like, even I can see that's freaking incredible. There's a lot of strength and power in representation, and people seeing this film with a majority black cast, you know, by a black director and writer, telling a very black story. You know, there is strength and power in that, and how that resonates with a black audience, especially. And so, you know, that's the reason why that film made the money it did. That's the reason why Black Panther is the first character you see stepping out of those portals in Avengers Endgame. You know, it's because of the impact that film and that character had. And I think if they had tried to do the film without Chadwick Boseman, to recast the Black Panther, I think people would have reacted negatively. And I you know, you can almost see the headlines now, like, not even death stops the Marvel machine from turning. And in fact, you know, we're seeing this. Harrison Ford has been cast in Thunderbolts. And the rumour is that he's going to be playing the character of Thunderbolt Ross. Thunderbolt Ross was played by William Hurt in the MCU up until now. And, you know, they're supposedly bringing Harrison Ford in as that same character. And it's not the first time the MCU has recast a character, but it is the first time they've recast a character after the actor's death. At least as far as I'm aware. And to me, that seems disrespectful. Especially because, you know, the argument I've seen is like, oh, they want to do the Red Hulk. Okay, you can still do the Red Hulk. Thunderbolt Ross isn't the only Red Hulk. Like, he's not. He is not the only version of the Red Hulk character. In fact, there's another Red Hulk character that is a military man in the same way, who appears in Avengers No Surrender, who was part of the AIM team. And he would be a great replacement for Thunderbolt Ross. And so I kind of hope that Harrison Ford is playing that character instead, rather than playing Thunderbolt Ross. Because, you know, while Thunderbolt Ross wasn't quite as impactful on the audience or the, you know, the universe as Chadwick Boseman was, it's the same thing. I don't like the idea of recasting a character because the actor's passed away. It feels tacky when there's so many characters that you could use instead. And I think Wakanda Forever has kind of proven that and shown that. And also, I don't think the audience would have reacted the same way if they hadn't recast him. You know, I think that, you know, the grief that a lot of us felt at the news of Chadwick Boseman's passing means that it's important that, you know, that grief be acknowledged in the film and by the characters in the film. And the fact that it has been is great. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed Wakanda Forever. I love the tributes to Chadwick Boseman in it. You know, the use of him in archive footage. There's a lot of twists and turns in the plot, which I really enjoyed as well. There's a couple of surprises, which I found were a lot of fun. And yeah, I'd recommend watching it. I think it's a lot stronger than the first film. Definitely. And as much as I love that first film has flaws. And I don't see those flaws here, at least not in the same way. You know, for example, the CGI is a lot better in this than it was in the first film. The first film had some quite clunky CGI. In this, it's generally pretty good. And also, one of my favourite little touches, because obviously Namor and his undersea city, Talokan, is appearing after Aquaman. One of the changes they've made in this, which I really enjoy, is that all of the scenes set in the ocean are dark. Because Aquaman was very, very bright in its underwater sequences. You know, everything was quite well lit, and it was explained by the Atlanteans' powers, making them easier to see. The ocean is dark. The ocean is very dark. There's not a lot of light that reaches low into the ocean. And all of the scenes in this that are underwater, there's a lot of scenes done with a large water tank. Everything is dark, and it looks incredible. And it makes it stand in really stark contrast to Aquaman, which is one of the reasons why I like it. So yeah, especially because I'm also thalassophobic. I am scared of the open water. I am scared of the open ocean. Like, it ignites a fear in me. And so, yeah, seeing this dark, oppressive environment under the water, yeah, brilliant. That worked for me very, very well. So yeah, Wakanda Forever. You know, I think it's well worth a watch, and I think it's definitely the best film in Phase 4. Like, no contest. It's the best film in Phase 4. And if Angela Bassett doesn't get her Oscar, we riot. Because she deserves it. It's fantastic. I'm not going to dwell too much on this one. Simply because there's more of it to come before it finishes. And when it finishes, I think I'll probably discuss a few more of my thoughts on the whole thing as it is. But one of the things I watched this year and finally caught up on is Stranger Things. And that was because season 4 of Stranger Things was obviously this huge sensation on social media throughout this year. You know, songs like Running Up That Hill making, you know, #1 in the UK again was absolutely fantastic. Like, you know, I think Kate Bush is a great musician, but one I've never been a huge fan of. But that song is one I like. And so I discovered a whole new love for it
since hearing it again as an adult. And yeah, season 4 of Stranger Things, I really enjoyed it. And like I said, I caught up on the entire series up until this point. So I've watched Series 1, Series 2, Series 3, Series 4. Watching them all, I am not sure that Series 4 is the best. But that said, there is a lot in it to enjoy. The cast is kind of split for most of it, which is one thing that I didn't find the best. But, you know, the cast is split up. They're all doing different things. They're all investigating their own things, which all sort of tie together and come together in the end. And, you know, the villain, Vecna, I'm not quite sure how I feel about him yet. He's definitely threatening, but at the same time, elements of him do feel very cliche, and I do prefer some of the sort of unknowable eldritch horror elements that were in previous seasons, like the Mind Flayer in series 2 and 3, or the Demogorgon in the first series. That doesn't mean it's bad. Like I said, it's not bad. There's a lot to enjoy. The characters are interesting. There is a lot of them, but they are interesting. They are cool. You know, the way they are all developing and expanding is so much fun. Dustin is my absolute favourite. I think he's incredible. You know, Nancy is great. Will and his sort of unrequited love is absolutely lovely. And yeah, I think that's evolved really nicely throughout the show. 11 is just cool. She is badass. Hopper is fantastic, and his whole story in the Russian prison was brilliant. You know, Murray's been a lot of fun this season as well. So yeah, I've really enjoyed it. And Maxine as well. Maxine is incredible. She is so good. Like, Sadie Sink is fantastic. How she didn't get nominated or win an Emmy, I have no idea. She's so good in this. You know, knowing that she's going to die, but just like confronting it and just ready for it. Absolutely brilliant. Loved it. And, you know, obviously the big scenes that everyone's been going on about, the two musical scenes, especially Running Up That Hill and Master of Puppets, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Eddie is so much fun as well. His death was... I don't want to say it was unexpected. There seems to have been a habit in Stranger Things of not wanting to kill off the main characters, which means that they introduce characters each season who then die off in either that season or the next one. So, unfortunately, that's a thing. And so, yeah, I felt that Eddie might die at some point. You know, even if I hadn't had that spoiled for me, it made sense that he might die. But yeah, it was good. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. And I think they're gearing up for season 5, and they've completely changed the town. You know, this whole void to the Upside Down that's just kind of appeared in the middle of the town. Yeah, there's I think they're gearing up to what could potentially be a very epic conclusion. And I'm very interested to see what that conclusion actually is. because it has the potential to be really good and also quite tragic. Like, I do not get the feeling that every character will survive the final story. Like, there will be some deaths that matter. And I worry that characters that I really like Nancy, like Robin, like Murray, like Hopper, like Dustin even, and like Max, might end up dead. So, yeah, I think when Strange Things finally finishes, I'm probably going to put all of my thoughts on it in a bit more of a concrete way then. But yeah, season 4 is good, and I'm glad I got around to watching it, and it was purely because of the hype of season 4 that I think I finally sat down and watched it. My partner sort of said, no, you're watching this. So we watched it, and I do not regret watching it. It was very, very good. Obviously, last year I discussed Star Wars The Clone Wars, and how I felt it made the prequels a lot better. And as proud as I am of that episode, I really think I should have held off until Tales of the Jedi had come out. Because watching Tales of the Jedi this year, I have been blown away by how good it is. Each episode, I don't think they're as long as Clone Wars episodes. I think they're only about 15 minutes long. But each episode is a very good, self-contained, short film, almost, that expands on one of the major characters, either Ahsoka or Count Dooku. And as good as the episodes with Ahsoka are, and they are good, like one of them features her as a child, as a baby, and her using the Force as an infant to save her mother. One of them features her being trained by Anakin and Rex, and how she, does a Jedi trial over and over and over again until she gets it, because she's fighting a war, so she wants to learn it properly. And obviously then how everything she's learnt there helps her to survive Order 66. Which, the ending of that particular segment and how that tied into those final episodes was absolutely brilliant. And then, of course, the last one, which focuses on Ahsoka after the war, after the rise of the Empire, and how she ends up joining the rebellion, obviously then leading into Rebels, which almost served as a nice little epilogue for the Clone Wars. While those were good, and they were good, I really enjoyed them, they were not the best part of this. The best parts of Tales of the Jedi were the episodes focusing on Count Dooku. They were absolutely incredible and filled in so many gaps in the story, because Dooku is described as this great Jedi. He's the Jedi who trained Qui-Gon Jinn. He was a Jedi Master, who would have been considered for the Council. He was trained by Yoda. And yet he fell and became a Sith. He was part of Palpatine's plot to create the clone army. And this is what really gets into that, and it's very good. Like the Dooku episodes, I don't want to spoil them for anyone who hasn't watched them, but they are so good. Like, they are definitely the pinnacle of this series. I think it's episodes 2, 3, and 5 are the Dooku focused episodes, and they all slot very neatly around episode 1. The first 2 take place before episode 1, and the final one
Episode 5 takes place in the aftermath of Episode 1. And it's Dooku dealing in part with the death of Qui-Gon in that earlier film, and how that impacts him as well. And you see him fall to the dark side. And I really think it does make Dooku a much better character. Because Dooku in the films, you know, he's played by Christopher Lee, and he's got this incredible setup for who he is. And the films really waste him. The Clone Wars are what made Dooku interesting. And what this does is take everything that had been established about Dooku and makes it tragic at the same time. It answers some of the questions of how he fell, how he became Sidious's pupil. But also makes it, like I said, makes it tragic. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. And I think if you're like me and you liked the Clone Wars, and you like what Dave Filoni has been doing with Star Wars, with things like The Bad Batch, and Rebels, and you know, I really like the work that he's been putting out for Star Wars. I think it's some of the best Star Wars work I've ever seen. Then Tales of the Jedi, while I was initially dismissive of it when it was announced, I'm glad I sat and watched it, especially the Dooku sections. Like, the Ahsoka stuff is good. I love me some Ahsoka. I think she's a great character. I'm always eager to see more of her. But this, what they did with Dooku, yeah, that's what makes this good. I'm going to be discussing this again next year, so I'm not going to dwell too much on it for now. But one thing I did watch this year was the centenary special on the BBC of The Power of the Doctor, the new Doctor Who special. Now, I have not caught up with Doctor Who. I lost all interest in paying for the BBC TV license a few years ago. Got rid of standard TV. I just use streaming services, or yo ho ho. Now, Power of the Doctor, with it being the centenary special, I figured I had to watch it, and so I have. And you know, I'm caught up with the idea of a lot of what Chris Chibnall has done with Jodie Whittaker's Doctor, and I'm aware that not a lot of people are very fond of it. However, I've only seen one episode of Jodie. Well, no, I've seen a few more now. I've seen about 3 at a friend's house. I've seen up until the Rosa Parks episode, whichever one that was, and I quite enjoyed what I was seeing of the character and how she was, and her cast. I thought there were some interesting things. I know a lot of the revelations that have really annoyed people are things like the Timeless Child plotline, which I'm sure I will discuss next year, because next year is the 60th anniversary of Doctor Who, so I am getting all into Doctor Who. I am going to rewatch all of the modern series, from Rose all the way up to the Power of the Doctor special, and give my thoughts on all of it. And for what it's worth, I really enjoyed Power of the Doctor. I quite liked the Master in it. There were obviously some things I didn't get, I didn't know about. Like, the Cyberman character that appeared. Apparently he'd been in a previous season. I didn't know who he was. But I'm sure I will when I rewatch it. For me, though, the thing that struck me very much about Power of the Doctor when I did watch it was the production level that had gone into it. Doctor Who has always felt a bit cheap. Like, it's always been known for being a bit cheap. And that's been true also of the modern era. Like, the modern era has used a lot more CG, but the CG hasn't always been great quality. That wasn't true with this episode. This episode had some very good visuals in it, and did a lot of things I really enjoyed. Like, I really liked seeing the old Doctors again. I've not really watched much classic Who. But I like when these actors return and hearing them talk about playing that character. And, I've seen the 5 Doctors, and I've seen a couple of little bits here and there, little clips. And I think I've seen the TV movie once a long time ago. So, I don't really have much attachment to doctors like Peter Davison, Colin Baker, or Sylvester McCoy. Although I do like Sylvester McCoy anyway. He was a television presenter. Kids TV presenter when I was a child. So, I've seen stuff with Sylvester McCoy. I quite like it. I get the feeling he'd be a doctor. It'd be his Doctor that I'd enjoy the most. If I was to watch classic. And yeah, watching this and seeing those classic Doctors come back, Paul McGann, Sylvester McCoy, Colin Baker, Peter Davison, and David Bradley returning as the first Doctor from the Twice Upon a Time special that he did a few years ago. That was great. I really enjoyed it. And then seeing Ace and Tegan come back as well. And like I said, I think Tegan was in the 5 Doctors special, so I knew who she was. And I've seen clips of Ace, which is why I think I'd enjoy her in the 7th Doctor the most if I was to watch classic, because what I have seen of Ace and 7, I quite like. And yeah, even not having this huge attachment to the classic era, this felt absolutely lovely. And the moments in it where the Doctor is speaking to Tegan and Ace and takes on the forms of their doctors in the costume, talking to them. Yeah, that pulled at my heartstrings. Even without the attachment to those characters, that pulled at my heartstrings. And I know Chris Chibnall seems to have gotten a bit of a bad rap with his modern Doctor Who work. But the thing is, he's been writing Doctor Who. I think he was writing Doctor Who under Stephen Moffat, definitely, and quite possibly even under Russell T Davies. And, as excited as I am for everything that Russell T Davies and Bad Wolf are going to bring to Doctor Who when they come back, which I'll get to in a minute, because obviously there was the final ending tease as the Doctor regenerated as well. But, and I'm really interested to see what Disney Plus are going to bring into the mix, because for those who don't know, Disney Plus is going to be putting money in and helping the BBC to produce Doctor Who going forward. Which is like, what the hell? That's crazy. But, I think as well Disney Plus is looking to carry Doctor Who in foreign countries, foreign territories, in partnership with the BBC. So that blows my mind. And that might explain where some of the impressive budget for this came from. Because they're not going to pay the money they're paying for Doctor Who and not put money towards it to lift it up in scale. But yeah, Chris Chibnall's got a bit of a bad rap for his work on Doctor Who. But he's been writing Doctor Who for a while. Clearly he can write good stuff. Clearly he's a fan of the character. They wouldn't have given him the job as showrunner if he wasn't. And so for any missteps he's done, Power of the Doctor was a great episode. And then, of course, right at the end, the Doctor regenerated. It was the end of Jodie Whittaker's era. And, you know, while it's a shame, I think that, you know, their era was cut short probably due to the fan reaction. I didn't hate Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor. I quite liked her as the Doctor from what I've seen of the character. And, you know, I'm excited to see the next Doctor. Ncuti Gatwa, I mean. Because the actual next Doctor is David Tennant for the 60th anniversary specials that we're getting in November. And while I am looking forward to that, most definitely I am looking forward to that. Especially because Donna is also coming back, and I love the pairing of David Tennant and Donna Noble. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing that. I'm far more excited to see what is going to happen next. Doctor Who, to me, always feels like Star Trek. It feels like a show that shouldn't look back towards the past too much. It can definitely refer to the past and honour the past. Not in the time travel way, I mean the actual past of the show. But it should be moving forward. It should be telling new stories. You know? And I'm always interested to see what Doctor Who does next. Because, as many versions of the Doctor have said, the Doctor should just be a person in a box, passing through, helping out, and moving on to the next thing. And, you know, Jodie Whittaker's era is over. It's time for someone else to pass through. So yeah, I enjoyed Power of the Doctor. It was a bit of a mad ramble about it. And a bit, I got onto the topic of Doctor Who as a whole, I think. I'll have more thoughts on that next year when I go back and look at Doctor Who. But yeah, for now, Power of the Doctor, that was my view on it. I thought it was good. I thought it was a good capstone to the era. No matter what the quality of that era is. One of the things that has absolutely blown me away in the past couple of years, I think I was mainly playing it over much of the past couple of years, has been Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk 2077. I bloody love it. I was really excited for its release. And, you know, while I didn't have time to play it on release, so I missed just how bad and buggy a lot of people were saying it is. I do have it on a Series X, which apparently wasn't too bad on. But even then, I know a lot of people have complained about just how bad it is at launch. But because I worked in retail at the time, it was Christmas, I didn't really get a chance to play it at launch. So, and then of course I read the reviews and I decided to wait until some of the patches came out. I started playing it not long after the 1.3 patch, which was the patch that fixed a lot of the bugs. Since then, I have put at least 200 hours into it. And yeah, I think I've only just completed it for the first time on a character that I've spent 90 hours on. So yeah, I really love Cyberpunk 2077. It's a universe that I'd never really explored before. It's a universe that's based on a tabletop game by Mike Pondsmith. And it is a world that I just fell in love with. I fell in love with the music, I fell in love with the style, the visuals, the lore, the world building. Like, this is a universe that speaks to me. And, you know, really hits that kind of sweet spot for me. So as a result, when Cyberpunk Edgerunners was announced,
I was very excited. Even though I'm not a huge fan of anime. I'm a fan of animation. I'm not a huge fan of anime. It's specifically the way a lot of anime is told. I don't know, there's something about it that doesn't gel with me. I am hoping to try and watch more anime, but I usually find I get sick of anime at some point. At least all the ones I've watched. I always get to a point where I'm like, I'm done. Which is weird, because I'm also a fan of tokusatsu as a genre, which is a Japanese... It's essentially Power Rangers. Power Rangers uses footage from the tokusatsu series Super Sentai. So that's where it gets its fighting footage from. So it's easier to explain tokusatsu if you explain it as Power Rangers. But essentially, giant monsters, spandex suits, superhero stuff. It's cheesy, it's for kids. Godzilla is another good example of tokusatsu, specifically kaiju tokusatsu, because it's giant monsters. I think tokusatsu literally translates as visual effects. And while I quite like a lot of tokusatsu shows, again, there will always come a point where I'm like, things become formulaic and a bit boring, and I kind of drift and zone out after a while. And I don't know, maybe it's a cultural thing, maybe it's the way they tell the stories that I struggle with. I don't know. I don't know what it is. But Edgerunners is an anime, and it is very anime in some regards. Like, some parts of it really do feel to me like a lot of other anime I've watched. Like, there's a lot of fan servicey elements. There's a lot of nudity where perhaps there doesn't need to be, like where there isn't such explicit nudity in the games. Or in the game, I should say. There's only one. Like, for example, when the characters are net running, which is where they plug themselves into the what's left of the internet and do hacking, surfing stuff. The character of Lucy, when they do that, is naked. Although they did provide a story reason for why Lucy does it naked, but not for why one of the other characters that does it naked. So, yeah, that was interesting. But there's a lot of times where Lucy is just naked. And, there's a lot of thirsty fans out there for Cyberpunk. I'm in the Cyberpunk subreddit and on Tumblr for it and things like that. There are a lot of thirsty fans, some of which really need to get laid. And so maybe that's just part of the course with it being an anime and with it being an adaptation of this property. But for me, Edgerunners isn't really related to the game. I've kind of gone off topic by talking about the game. Edgerunners isn't really related to the game, but it does build on the world of the game. And I really enjoyed it. It tells a self-contained story featuring the character of David. And David ends up, through a run of bad luck, ends up alone in Night City and needs to make money. And he finds himself in possession of a military-grade cyberware called a Sandevistan. Sandevistan is a cyberware that you can use in the game. I don't tend to use it. I'm not a fan of how it works, which essentially slows time and allows you to move fast and hit hard. And I don't use that because that's not the build I use in the game. I prefer the sort of the Netrunner build where you use an actual cyber deck and, hack your targets. But that's the way I play the game. But I will say, David with the Sandevistan in this, he is able to pull off some great things, and the way it's animated with like the freeze frames of him as he's moving around people, very, very cool. But yeah, he gets himself chipped. He has the cyberware put inside himself and joins a mercenary group to sort of earn some eddies, euro dollars, which are the currency in the game. And so he falls in with this group, and helps them on some missions, and ends up getting more and more cyberware because he starts getting, becomes part of this group, teamed up with, I've forgotten all their names now. Lucy is the main one, who's also the love interest. She's a net runner, but she doesn't seem to like logging into the net for reasons that get explained as the series go on. I don't want to spoil because they are quite good, I think, and the revelation does come quite late into the series, and I think this is worth a watch. Rebecca is obviously another one of the standouts. She is short, with a big jacket, not a lot of clothes, but she has this coloured, fancy patterned skin and eyes, which looks really cool. Because the cyberware that people can use in this universe includes things like modding their skin, and their skin tone and skin colour, to be bright, funky colours. And she's also got a massive shotgun, which she uses as well. And she's a lot of fun. I really enjoyed her. And I also watched the English dub. This is available in both a Japanese subbed version and also an English dub. And the English dub, the voices are very good. In fact, the main villain is voiced by Giancarlo Esposito. But all of the British voices are very good. And there are even a couple who returned from the game playing, minor characters who reappear. Because it's set at the same time frame as the game. For me, though, the things that really worked for this series, apart from the rather self-contained story, which, like I said, worked really well, the things that really made it stand out for me as a fan of the game are just how much it takes from the game. Like, pretty much every place the characters visit is a location lifted straight from the game. Like, they're having shots on, the action scenes on certain streets. And I'm like, I've been to that street in the game. I know where that is in Night City. And they were using music from the game, because the game has a whole load of music that has been not necessarily created for the game, but given to CD Projekt Red for the game. And most of it, I think, is exclusive to the game, or a lot of it is. Like, there are other releases for it, but if you look on places like Spotify or YouTube, it's pretty much the game version of that song that you can find. And, these are used to populate the radio stations as you're driving around. And, again, some of those songs are in this show and used as plot points in this show. Like, there's one, I've forgotten the name of it now, that plays over a couple of scenes of David. There's Friday Night Firefight, which plays over a couple of action sequences, including the one where they escape from an ambulance. There's the song I Really Want to Stay at Your House, which plays over a couple of romantic moments. And then there's a new song on the end credits. Like, the opening credits use a song from Franz Ferdinand called This Fire, which is a decent song, but I felt was a bit out of place. But the ending song was a new one written for this show called Let You Down. And I actually saved watching the end credits until I'd finished the series. And I'm so glad I did, because that song worked, like the end credit song in the actual game itself, worked quite well to end the story. Because while this is a self-contained story and a very good story, it doesn't have the happiest ending. Because one thing I'm learning about the world of Night City, the world of Cyberpunk, there are no happy endings in Night City. at best, endings are bittersweet. You know, even the happiest ending in the game, from what I've seen, I've played 2 of the endings so far, and I've seen a couple of the others on YouTube. And those endings are sad. You know, even the happiest ending is tinged with sadness and has sadness to it. There are no happy endings in Night City, and that is true of this show. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the storytelling. I really enjoyed the characters. And I really enjoyed the tragic nature of it. I like stories that have an element of tragedy to them, especially when you get to a point and you realize the tragedy is kind of unavoidable. And that's exactly what happens here. It gets to a point in this show towards the final few episodes, and you kind of get a feeling of what's going to happen. And yeah, you're right. What you think is going to happen happens. And you've kind of worked out already just how tragic it's going to be and how bad it's going to be. But even then, there's still some shocks and curves thrown your way. And yeah, not every one of the crew walks out of this one. You know, just like moments in the game. You know, where, you know, for anyone who's played Cyberpunk 2077, the opening of the game, I say the opening, it's like the first few hours, depending on how long you've played the opening of the game for. But, you know, your character V gets hired to pull off a heist with your best friend Jackie. And in the aftermath of the heist, V is now dying and Jackie is dead. Because it was a heist that you were completely unready for. You were not ready for it at all. And you were way out of your league. And yeah, that's kind of what happens to David as well. It's exact similar sort of tragedy. And yeah, you know, this game really blew me away. The more time I've put into it, the more I have explored this world in the game, the more it means to me. Like, to me, this is now one of my favourite games. Even though it is still janky, even though it still has errors and faults, it is one of my favourite games. And this is now one of my favourite series. And I really hope it's not the only series that we get in this universe. I'm not sure I necessarily want a live action series. I really like the animated angle. And I think the world of Night City had to be brought into an animated universe. It's too bizarre to work in live action, I think. And I think it really works here, and I think the series is great. I think the series is great on its own, but if you're a fan of this game, it's even better. So one of the breakout hits for me last year was The Suicide Squad, the James Gunn directed sequel / reboot to the 2016 Suicide Squad film. I really enjoyed The Suicide Squad. Way more than I thought I was going to. I already kind of enjoyed the first one. I think it's definitely flawed, and I'm very curious to see David Ayer's cut if it ever gets released. But there were definitely elements to it I liked. I really liked Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn. I really liked Viola Davis as Amanda Waller. I like quite a few of the other characters as well. I liked Jai Courtney as Captain Boomerang. I didn't hate Will Smith as Deadshot, and I really liked Joel Kinnaman as Rick Flag. But obviously, there were flaws with it as a film. There were obviously things that had been changed behind the scenes by DC, which had obviously impacted it. But, and I wasn't a huge fan of a lot of the costuming decisions. But, and less said about Jared Leto's Joker, the better. Although, like I said, David A. says there's a very good version of that out there somewhere. I'm inclined to believe him. And I kind of want to see it and judge it on its own merit. Because, the Snyder Cut actually took some of the things that were derided about the original cut of Justice League and did make them better. So, it's possible. But, I also don't think DC is going to, when they can't even release Batgirl, I don't think they're going to, when they can't even release Batgirl, I don't think they're going to release a director's cut of a 6-year-old movie. It's possible, but it's unlikely. But The Suicide Squad was very, very good. And it reinvented, it brought back some of the elements I liked. It brought back Viola Davis. It brought back Margot Robbie. It brought back Joel Kinnaman. It brought back Jai Courtney, although he doesn't last very long. But it also added so much more. It brought in Idris Elba as Bloodshot, John Cena as Peacemaker, King Shark, played by, voiced by Sylvester Stallone, who does a brilliant job. And, the Ratcatcher and Starro the Conqueror, which was so good. And was exactly the sort of thing DC should have been doing 6 years ago. But, forgetting the DC universe for a minute, The Suicide Squad was great. But to me, one character that stood out and was far better than he had any right to be was John Cena's Peacemaker. And the twist with Peacemaker in that film, where it turns out he's actually working for Waller, and then he kills Rick Flag and turns on the team. It was a good twist. I was not expecting Rick Flag to die. Like, if you told me, which characters... in fact, I think I did make a prediction of which characters would die, and I called pretty much all of the ones from the opening sequence who would die. But of the main team, I didn't think Rick Flag would die. I didn't think Polka Dot Man would die either, actually, because I thought it would be funnier to keep him alive, because he wanted to die so badly. So I thought Bloodshot might die, and possibly Ratcatcher, just because she seemed so decent. And I thought, she ain't gonna last. But no, she survived. But yeah, John Cena as Peacemaker, Christopher Smith, the Peacemaker. And then he got the spin-off. He got given a spin-off series to explore that character more. And so many people were like, when it was announced, they were like, because it was announced before the Suicide Squad even released, and people were like, are we going to want to see more of this character? And then we watched that movie and we were like, oh, actually, yeah, we do. We want to see more of him. And watching Peacemaker, I think this is one of the best things DC have ever released in terms of a live action adaptation. And part of that is the guiding hand of James Gunn. Like, James Gunn has a talent for making sympathetic characters out of people that we probably shouldn't like. You know, this is true for a lot of his body of work, not just the Guardians of the Galaxy films and his other superhero work, but true of a lot of his body of work, actually. You know, he makes a lot of very sympathetic characters out of people who are objectionable. Even going back to, you know, the first James Gunn film I saw, which was Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, you know, which is written by Zack Snyder. Of the objectionable characters in that, only one of them is a complete asshole that you're actually happy dies. Everyone else, even with objectionable qualities, they have things about them that you like. Good example being CJ, the security guard. You know, he starts the film as a complete douche. And yet by the end, you know, when he goes, he gets the big heroic sacrifice. He's a character you care about. And that's so true of watching Peacemaker. Because there is a lot going on in Peacemaker, and this also released in a very unusual way. Like, I didn't watch it when it came out originally. I caught up on it after it had all come out. But when it originally released, it dropped the first 3 episodes at once. And when I finally got around to watching them, I completely understood why they'd done that. And it's because those first 3 episodes actually set up a lot of the plot and characters going forward. They are essentially Act 1 of, like, if this was a movie, that's Act 1. And, you know, this isn't quite like that. It's not an 8-hour film, although it kind of is. But there are some episodes that do feel episodic. But there are others that do feel much, you know, a part of a much bigger whole. And episodes 1 to 3 are definitely that. You know, the conclusion, the reveal of the butterflies and what they are, that's very clever. Very, very good. I enjoyed it. And, you know, the introduction of bringing Peacemaker back and, you know, developing him, revealing his father and revealing so much about his history and why he is the way he is. And, you know, you meet his father, played by Robert Patrick, and it all makes sense. His father is the White Dragon. His father is a Nazi supervillain. You know, is there any... Of course that's why the Peacemaker is who he is. You know, it's an objection at his father, while also clearly being inspired by his father. And then you learn about what happened to his brother, and, oh, that's horrible. Just this horrible, tragic backstory. And then throw in other characters like Vigilante. You know, who is... or Adebayo, and the way they relate to Peacemaker. Even someone like Economos, who he... You know, and Harcourt, and how difficult he makes things for them for so much of the series. And yet it's their reactions with him, their relationships with him, their relationships with each other as they grow into this team that makes it worth watching. And yeah, like in a universe that has some of the biggest comic book characters ever, Superman, Batman, the Wonder Woman, the Flash, the Green Lantern, Aquaman, why is the character I care the most about and really want to see more of going forward bloody Peacemaker? You know, that boggles my mind that I care this much about a character whose most famous contribution to comic book history is being the character that Alan Moore wanted to use, got told he couldn't, and turned him into the comedian. You know, for anyone who doesn't know that story, in Watchmen, Alan Moore originally wanted to use the Charlton Comics characters, but DC turned around and said, oh no, we've got plans for them, you can't use them. So Alan Moore created his own characters. And this is why he's so interested in getting the rights for those characters. Because, you know, he couldn't use Captain Atom, so he created Dr. Manhattan. He couldn't use Judo Master, so he created Ozymandias. He couldn't use the Blue Beetle, so he created Night Owl, Nightshade, Silk Spectre. And, you know, the Question is Rorschach, and Peacemaker is the comedian. And, you know, in terms of comics, that's Peacemaker's biggest contribution to comics, is that he is the character that directly inspired the comedian. But in the DCEU, he's played by John Cena, who, by the way, is a freaking awesome actor. Like, watching him in this, he is so good. He is so good. He puts so much real pathos and heart into this character, even in scenes where he doesn't talk. You know, there's one scene where he's sitting at a piano and he's playing Home Sweet Home by Motley Crue. And it's one of the most quietly and intense emotional scenes in the entire show. And it's absolutely beautiful and fantastic. And just deeply tragic at the same time. And yeah, John Cena is just an incredible actor. Absolutely incredible. Like, he really is. It's so good. So good. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. And I heartily recommend Peacemaker. You don't even really need to have seen you don't even really need to have seen the Suicide Squad, because the important parts of the Suicide Squad, which is Peacemaker's heel turn and what he does to Rick Flag, are covered in this show. Like, literally, those scenes are repeated in this show. And yeah, the show itself is great. John Cena really carries this show. His work as an actor is absolutely fantastic, and he's supported by other good actors. The actress who plays Adebayo, she is fantastic. I want to say Danielle Brooks. That sounds right in my head. I'm not sure if it's right. I apologise if it's not. But yeah, she's really good. Like, Adebayo is a great character. You know, Stephen Agee as Economos, he has some great moments as well. And yeah, Robert Patrick as the White Dragon, he plays that role menacingly, like really menacingly. And there are, like I said, some absolutely fantastic moments, and obviously an amazing soundtrack throughout this entire show, because James Gunn knows his music, and the music in this is a lot of old classic glam rock hair metal stuff, with some like modern metal thrown in. And oh my god, it's good. Like, I've listened to this soundtrack there's a Spotify playlist for this soundtrack. I've listened to it, love it. And obviously the actual opening song, which is Wigwam's Do You Really Want to Taste It, shot over an opening scene that I have never been able to skip. Like, I would never skip the intro if I rewatch Peacemaker, because it's that good. The characters are doing a dance routine, and John Cena can't dance, but bless him, he's trying. And yeah, it's so good. I really, really enjoyed this show. I think it's probably the best thing, like I said, best live action thing DC have put out in a long time. And I will stand by that. You know, I love me the Arrowverse. I love the Batman. I can see why people like the Joker, even though I personally didn't gel with it. I quite liked some of the films in the DCEU. I've really enjoyed Shazam. I enjoyed Aquaman. I enjoyed Birds of Prey, The Suicide Squad. But this is on another level. It really is. So yeah, if you haven't seen Peacemaker, do yourself a favour, go and watch it. It is very good. Okay, so come to the end of the list, and the one thing that I still need to discuss, which is the best single film I've watched this year. I'm not as caught up on films as I am on television, and I'm still not caught up on a lot of television. But I did make an effort to see this film, not in the cinemas. I caught it on Amazon Prime. I bloody loved it. It's the most awarded film in history now, I think. You know, in terms of all of the awards it's won, not just that, like, you know, Critics' Choice, Screen Actors Guild, Golden Globes, you know, and now Academy Awards, because it's won Oscars as well. And that is Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. And this film is absolutely sublime. It is so good. I loved this movie from start to finish. I've watched it through a couple of times now. I've watched it with my kids as well. The older kids, I was like, this is good, you need to watch it. Yeah, I think it's absolutely incredible. If you've seen it, you know why. If you haven't seen it, stop listening, go watch it, then come back. Because seriously, the less you know about this movie going into it, the better. And I mean that in all seriousness. Like, there is so much good stuff in here that needs to be experienced. You know, you can't sit with your phone on. You have to really focus on this film. But it's worth it. Every single frame of this film rewards the viewing experience. You know, it is a treat for the eyes. It is fantastically edited. You know, there's so much going on, and you know, there's comedy in it, there's action in it, there's a lot of heart in it, and I absolutely loved it. It's by the Daniels, you know, directing duo Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert. I don't know anything else they've done except for a shoot that they've done recently with Jennifer Coolidge. Because obviously I'm recording this quite late in the year, and obviously after the Oscars. And so, yeah, they did a very tokusatsu-inspired photo shoot with Jennifer Coolidge, which I thought was absolutely great, because I love Jennifer Coolidge and I love tokusatsu, so it was great. They've also done a couple of music videos, which have earned Grammy Awards, but beyond that, I don't know anything else they've done. But the timing on display in this is incredible. The editing is incredible. And then, of course, the actual cast itself. The cast is Michelle Yeoh as the lead character, who is brilliant and deserved that bloody Oscar. You know, she's absolutely fantastic at this. Jamie Lee Curtis, Best Supporting Actress, again, deserves the Oscar. I do think Angela Bassett would have been a good winner for the Oscar as well. But yeah, Jamie Lee Curtis also deserves it for her work in Hollywood. I think Angela Bassett was the better performance this year. But Jamie Lee Curtis's performance in this was very good. But I like her in a lot of things anyway. And Ke Huy Quan, who was absolutely fantastic. He's got a lot of heart in this movie and is doing a lot of cool stuff. And it helps that both Michelle Yeoh and Ke Huy Quan can do their own stunts, and it definitely shows that they are doing their own stunts. They're doing their own stunt work, because the stunt work in this film is incredible. And yeah, so like I said, if you haven't seen it, I'm going to discuss a little bit of the plot, so stop listening, go watch it, and then come back. So ready? 3, 2, 1. Right. So if you're here, I'm assuming you've seen the film, and yeah, you'll understand why it's great. It's such a beautiful depiction of the multiverse and the potential that the multiverse has. Although I have seen a very good breakdown saying that a lot of them exemplify late-stage capitalism, because it's one of those things that's kind of hard for human beings to imagine now. We're so ingrained in a capitalist society, which is disturbing. Like, the only world that doesn't feel very much like the modern world is one where there's no life and they're just rocks. But I also think that that's also as a way of something that the audience can easily relate to. So it's a storytelling limit at the same time. As it is, the film is incredible. There's so many good visuals in this film. So many of the jump cuts, zooming in on Michelle Yeoh as she's transferring through different universes, are fantastic, and there's so much going on in them. One of my favourite moments is Joe Butapaki holding... I think she's holding a rod, first of all, and then it transforms through a whole load of different things until it ends up as a sword. And it changes into about 30, 40 different things all at once, really quickly. Absolutely fantastic. And Joe Butapaki herself, just the things she was able to do just by transferring things through the multiverse. So clever. Really, really clever. I think part of the plots, the plot is very weird. You know, the whole idea of verse jumping and the bagel with everything on it. That's also a black hole. But at the same time, I don't really care about that, because what I care about is the creativity on display and the fact that the emotional story of Evelyn and her family is what's anchoring this film, and is done, like, that particular story is done so well through the different universes, explaining who these characters are, what their connections are to each other. Oh, it's absolutely beautiful. I really enjoy it. Like, the discussions with her daughter Joy, where she's trying to appeal to her and trying to make her see things. The way she stands up to her father and announces Joy's partner proudly, rather than trying to cover it. She goes through such a change in this movie. Evelyn's character arc and her growth throughout this movie is absolutely incredible. And all of the actors do a fantastic job, but especially Michelle Yeoh, because she is doing so much in this movie. Because she's playing so many different versions of herself that are all so different. While at the same time, all of them are influencing and growing based on each other. Very clever. Very, very clever. And, the film is a bit bizarre. It is a bit jumbled. You really do have to pay attention to it. Like, I do not think it would be easy to follow if you weren't paying attention. You could very easily get lost. It follows standard narrative tropes in that it's continuing along the same linear path until it isn't, and then it starts jumping around and you get the universes and everything gets weird. But it works so well. I really, really enjoyed it. I I don't feel like I can say anything that hasn't already been said about just how good it is, except that it is. I feel, if anything, seeing how creative this film is with its multiverse makes every other multiverse story worse. Like, no matter what Marvel or DC or Star Trek or any of the other universes out there do with their multiverse now, it can't be as creative as this. It just can't. You know, there was so much absolute insane things going on in this. You know, Evelyn actually sums it up in a line herself where she just thinks of whatever random thing and somewhere out there it's real. Like Rakakuni. It's... oh, absolutely nuts. Also, I love the idea behind the dimension jumping, that you have to do the most unlikely thing. Like, you have to do something really unlikely to sort of trigger the dimension jump. Like, you know, put your shoes on the wrong feet, or chew some lip balm, or, you know, take a chewing gum from under the desk and eat it, or what was it? One guy was licking a wall, peeing yourself, the guy who put the butt plug up his ass, you know, so random and bizarre. And yeah, elements of this had me laughing my ass off, elements of it had me crying. It's so good, and it's all done in one movie, and not even a long movie. Like, it's 2 hours and 20 minutes, I think. Or is it? No, it's a bit long. Yeah, 2 hours 20, 140 minutes. So yeah, it's not that long at all. And like Marvel are building towards a multiverse saga. They did Multiverse of Madness this year, and then this film came out and pissed all over it in one movie. Everything Marvel has planned for the next 3 years. Kevin Feige must have just looked at everything everywhere all at once and just gone, oh damn, now what do we do? Oh dear. And I'm not the first person who's made that assertion, because it's so good. So yeah, that's my top geek thing of the year, whether it's film or series. If you haven't seen it, go and bloody watch it, because it's so good. Like it's amazing. And yeah. So yeah, that's my top list of the year. So yeah, that's my list of the best things that I've seen throughout 2022. You know, there is more stuff that I haven't seen this year that I do want to discuss and I do want to talk about when I eventually get around to seeing it. Like, I wanted to see Prey, and I haven't got around to watching it yet. I wanted to see House of the Dragon. I've not got around to watching it yet. Same with Rings of Power. And obviously Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And I will get around to those things, and I will probably drop reviews for them when I do. You know, and there's other things I have seen this year that I do have thoughts on, but I'm going to discuss at another time, such as Jurassic World of Dominion or Picard Season 2. And I will discuss those things, but I'm not discussing them yet, because I'm planning on discussing them in future episodes. So, yeah. But that's my final episode for Season 4, done. I'm sorry it's taken so long to come out. You know, I'm still talking about things from 2022, and we're now in 2023. But there's a lot of good stuff coming that I'm really hoping you're all going to enjoy. So, stick around for that. Until next time, my friends, you all look after yourself, take care of your
physical and mental health as best as you can. And if you need support, reach out for it. I love you all. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, my friends, for once again joining me on Garhdo Goes Geek. Your continued support for this podcast means the absolute world to me, and I am grateful for every single one of you who stays and listens to one of my episodes. It means the absolute world. Now, if you would like to engage more with me or the podcast, we have a Discord community, small but growing, and we now have commissions open on Ko-Fi. So if there's a topic you would like to see me cover, you can pay me to cover it. All funds will be used for legal purchase of the relevant items where I do not have them. Have a look on the link tree for more information. Until next time, look after yourselves.